Hello, everybody. If you are just joining us, then thank you so much for being here. This is our webinar about how we built self-care non-alcoholic beer, how some freaks went from oh shit to oh yeah, aka how Three Magnets built a world-class craft non-alcoholic beer brand from the brink of bankruptcy. Before we begin, we do have a Start Engine campaign going on as part of our growth plan in order to get to major retail. And you can find out all sorts of information about that on our Start Engine page. So now it's time to start our story. And where do we start? Well, we had a brewery before we had self-care. So we started a brewery. And so this whole webinar is going to be broken down into right now, just part one and part two. Part one is going to be a majority of the webinar. That's our origin story. That's what got us to here. And part two's only begun. So we're just going to have a little bit to touch on for part two. And then we're going to start with act one. There will be act two and act three. We have three different acts within this first story. And we're going to start with Three Magnets and how Three Magnets got its start. And to do that, we actually have to back up a little bit further. This is a picture of me. I'm the president of Three Magnets, my wife, who is the CEO of Three Magnets. And this is a picture of us probably in the mid-aughts, but we actually met New Year's Eve 1999. We both went to the same college here in Olympia, but we had never met each other before. But we met each other at a party in Seattle, and we hung out for a little bit. We talked a bit. We kind of liked each other, and then we parted ways before midnight. So we didn't get that storybook midnight kiss on New Year's Eve. In fact, I'm pretty sure Sarah kissed somebody else that night. But what she did do was she stalked me afterwards because she knew my classes that I was taking, and so she made sure to accidentally bump into me, and I'm glad that she did because I had zero game. I probably still have zero game. I don't know. It's been 20 years and I'm in no hurry to find out. So I'm glad she came and found me. I ended up going to her house like a month later and never leaving, and then we just became life partners. She's got a great business mind. She's also a great chef, and she's the one who really keeps this place level-headed and makes sure that we're not overextending ourselves and that we're making smart decisions, and then making sure that the crazy weird ideas that I have can actually come to fruition. And so we actually are a really good pair and balance each other out quite nicely. We ended up buying a house just a couple years into living together. And then 3 years after that, we bought an existing restaurant, Darby's Cafe, a brunch place. We wanted to work for ourselves and we wanted to create something. Having never owned a business before, purchasing a business that was already existing seemed way less daunting to get our feet wet rather than starting something from scratch, having to reinvent the wheel, the learning that comes along with that. So we did buy an existing restaurant, but over that first year, we changed the branding to be something that, you can see that Darby sign that came with it, and then the new logo that we created. And then my wife recreated the menu over the first couple of years, and we kept a couple of the classics, but a vast majority of it became our own thing. And that was a really great experience and a great way to kind of get our feet wet. And we ended up winning a lot of Best Olympia awards from various different publications. And my wife primarily ran that. I helped out on the weekends. I helped out with the communication and the branding because that's kind of where my experience was. Meanwhile, while she was doing that, I shortly thereafter got a job for the city of Olympia as a senior brand specialist. My team rebranded the city because it had a really old logo from like the 80s. And so I actually created the new Olympia logo. But more importantly, what I did was the communication efforts. So like this is a utility bill insert. Once a year, you have to publish a water quality report. Most people don't even look at water quality reports. They don't even think about it. It's just this long page of boring information, but it's important for people to know, about their water quality, finding ways to get people to actually pay attention and be engaged. That was my job. And I actually won quite a few awards from 3CMA, which is an entity that does competitions for communications efforts for municipalities. And so we were doing some really cool stuff, but ultimately I'm not a cubicle person. I was working in a cubicle. I really enjoyed the work that I was doing, but I really had so much fun with Darby's. And so I kind of wanted to find a way to get into what we had going on in our lives and being self-employed. And that opportunity came sooner than later, really, because Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives reached out to us in 2012. So I had been working at the city for a little over 6 years at this point, and we had been nominated by quite a few people in town. So they kind of scoped us out and they liked what they saw. And so they vetted us and we got approved to be on the show. And that filmed in late 2012 and it aired in 2013. Now, we knew this was our 15 minutes of fame and that this was something that we could potentially leverage to actually start a business that was our own from scratch, not something that was adapted. And we also, right around this time, we're kind of seeing the brewery scene exploding across the state and in Seattle and down in Portland, yet there was still only one brew pub in Olympia. And we're like, why is that? We're a smaller town, but we're not so small that we would only support one brew pub. So I started writing a business plan and I spent a few months on this. We had meetings with the Economic Development Council. They really helped us with a lot of the financials because that wasn't really something we had done before for a project this big. So we were going from a small greasy spoon with about 30 seats to a large brew pub. And this brew pub has capacity for up to 150 seats. It has a huge outdoor area. So this was a big jump for us, right? And so we needed to make sure our ducks were in a row. So we took this plan to our local bank and they helped us apply for a couple of SBA loans. We got a 7-year and a 10-year loan, and then the third loan directly from our bank for another 10 years. And we started a brewery. And so we had the money, we got our TTB application approved and we started building. We found a place that was actually a little bit too big for what our current plan was, because we found a developer who was pretty much, this was his first project, and he's actually done over a dozen projects in Olympia since then. He's the most prolific developer right now, putting in a lot of housing. And we knew he had plans for at least 10 projects. And he was the only developer that was giving tenant improvement money. And realistically, that's the money we needed to get over that hump and be able to get that loan, because the banks want to see about 30% down, and we were able to count that money. And so altogether, the project with money we put in and the loans that we took cost approximately $1 million. And keep in mind, this is with an unproven brand and zero brewing experience, almost zero brewing experience, zero successful brewing experience. We had homebrewed a couple of beers previously, and they did not turn out. So we didn't delude ourselves into thinking that we were going to be the brewer. In fact, we interviewed established brewers, and honestly, we weren't a big fan of anyone we had interviewed. We were really looking for someone who was going to think outside of the box and be very innovative. My wife and I had this bottle shop just a few blocks from our house, and we used to walk there, and we'd always say, what's new, what's new, what's new? And we'd try the new beers, and we'd always get new stuff, and we rarely bought the same beers twice. And that's the kind of experience we saw people getting more and more into across the country. And that seemed like a better business model to us than having, your 10 flagship beers and having the same beers over and over and over. We just kind of saw that's the way that the industry was changing with our limited knowledge of it at the time. So we had zero plans to actually can or package or bottle or anything like that. We actually ended up getting introduced to probably one of the most prolific homebrewers in the city. We were introduced to them by the local cider maker. And then we went down to a music festival, local kind of grassroots one, where he was pouring his homebrew just for free. He was just pouring it for people because he loved for people to taste his creations, and he loved to get the feedback. And that's just what he did. He actually worked for the Postal Service, and you can see us in a little coffee shop that was one of our favorites, Bar Francis. And we would meet there, and we would kind of discuss this project. He would be on his lunch break, and I would go on my lunch break from the city. And we would just talk about what kinds of things, we wanted to do. And it became pretty apparent that was our head brewer. So like I said, we didn't have any plans to bottle, but when we opened, our pub was slower than we were hoping. We found out since then we really need to be at that $2 million mark to have a full service restaurant work in such a big space. And I think we were closer to the $1.6 million mark when we opened. And so we really had some work to do. We didn't have much in the way of a production space. We were just supposed to be selling $7 beers over the counter, about $1 cost per beer. There's actually money to be made that way. But when you're bringing in mobile canners, mobile bottlers, and all the costs that are associated with that on such an inefficient, non-production brewery system, you don't necessarily bottle for the money. You do it more for the exposure to bring people in. And our pub was right off I-5, and Olympia's right smack between Portland and Seattle. So we already had a lot of fans from people stopping in our pub from Portland and Seattle. We were getting a lot of buzz, and we said, shit, let's just bottle. Let's do that. So we started bottling. We started sending it down to Portland. We started sending it up to Seattle. You can see from practically day one, we were partnering with the music industry and doing these kind of music-themed beers. And that actually turned out to be a really good thing, this packaging, because all of a sudden we could enter awards. I mean, you could send growlers up as well, but those never present as well. So we entered for the Washington Beer Fest, and we won a bunch of medals in the first couple of years doing that. And in our first full year of bottling, we actually won a GABF medal in 2015, which is like the most prestigious competitions in the country. And so that was really exciting for us. And it really kept us motivated to do these releases because we knew it was working. I mean, we were probably the first, it's hard to know for sure, but definitely one of the first breweries in the Pacific Northwest to even package a hazy IPA. And at the time, we had to tell people what a hazy IPA was because most people didn't know. Now, of course, it's taken over the world and everybody's brewing them. And pretty much everybody in the craft beer scene knows what they are. But at the time, it was very cutting edge and it was a lot of fun. And we were doing really cool stuff and we were getting noticed by a lot of people. And this allowed us to do traveling release parties where we would ship a bunch of beer down to our favorite bottle shop in Portland and we'd do a release party there. And then we'd go up to Tacoma and we'd do a release party there. And then we'd go up to Seattle and do a release party there. And that's not what a lot of people were doing because breweries in Seattle and Portland, they had enough customers to do a release party in their own pub and kind of have a line around the block. But we have a much smaller population in Olympia. And so being able to use those two big markets up north of us and down south of us was a really good way for us to build our brand, we found out very quickly. So we were really happy that we were able to do that. And that opened up a lot of doors. So the Shelton brothers, they're no longer in business, but they were probably the most prestigious importer and distributor in the country. They would import all the fancy European wild ales, a lot of the really exciting brands in the States as well. And they ended up picking us up because they really loved what we were doing with our wild ales. And then we got invited to pour at the festival, which was a beer festival they put on. It was in a different place every single year. And this particular one we were invited to was at Grand Central Station in Buffalo. It has been abandoned for many, many years, and they were just starting a refurb project on it. So they didn't even have electricity. They had to hook up generators and string lights and everything like like that in this beautiful old train station. It was an incredible experience, but it was also really just cool to get our name out there on the bigger stage. And then we were invited to Bread Culmination Fest, and that's at Anchorage Brewing. Again, one of the most popular, most innovative, most groundbreaking breweries in the country. And to be included in that beer fest is really awesome. And so it helped get the name out there. During Magnus Brewing in 2017, we had the Seattle Times say that we were brewing the most exciting IPAs. And that's out of the, I don't know, probably 100 or so brew pubs directly in the Seattle area. And here we are out of Olympia getting noticed. And that was just really extremely cool. And we were profitable by 2018. There were certainly some things we could have done early on to be able to bring in more money by cutting corners or maybe stopping certain programs that were laying groundwork for us that maybe were not profitable in the short term. Or if there's just some things you do in the brewing industry just to keep relevance, and you do some things that just don't make money, but they're increasing your brand equity, right? And so we really have always believed in laying a solid foundation from the beginning and doing as much as you can afford to do to fortify that foundation for the longevity of the brand, rather than just trying to make that quick buck right away and cutting anything that's not immediately making money. So we really believe in laying that groundwork. And so that's what we did. Distributing that beer was able to bring in enough business into the pub that we started making money. And that was really awesome. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was some money. But shit happens, right? And the pandemic was not the first shit happens that we experienced. And this was not on our radar. My wife was actually 8 months pregnant with our second kid when we found out that our head brewer at the time was actually starting up his own brewery. So they already had this in the works for quite some time. And we're still friends with this person. But it was a really hard thing for us just a year and a half in. We're making like all these big moves. We're doing all this cool stuff. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, what are we going to do? And so we went a couple of years just keeping the program going that he was doing. And unfortunately, the brewer we had, the assistant brewer that kind of took over, was kind of losing their passion. And so we were really interested in getting somebody in here who was doing cool stuff again. And we met that person, Aaron Blondin. He was a brewer for Chainline way back in the day. He actually worked at some really, really large breweries like Red Hook. So he does have experience with large breweries and small. He has won Great American Beer Festivals and World Beer Cup. He won a Glenn Hay Falconer Foundation scholarship for brewing. He also taught at the local brewing and distilling program, and he also sold malt on the side, craft malt. I mean, this guy knew beer inside and out. He knew the ingredients inside and out. He was doing some really cool stuff, and we were just so stoked to bring him on in 2019. So why am I sharing this backstory with you? Because I want to show that we have been trendsetters since before self-care even existed. We never wanted to be a lifestyle brand. We wanted to have substance. We wanted people to understand kind of what our values were by what we were doing, not by what we were saying. And innovation is very much a core value for us. It always has been. And that didn't start with self-care. Our voice was not created by a marketing firm. We do everything in-house. I do all of our labels and everything like that. And so this truly is a grassroots startup. We have authenticity in everything that we do. And we're not phoning it in to make a quick buck like a lot of the bigger players in the industry. Some of them have been guilty of for sure. And to show that we have the ability to pivot and thrive despite adversity, we were able to kind of pull through losing what was the most exciting brewer probably in Washington there for a little bit. And we were still able to do some really cool stuff. But there was this big elephant in the industry. And the elephant in the industry was the craft beer bubble. And a lot of people didn't like to talk about the elephant in the industry, but to kind of pretend like it didn't happen or that wasn't there. But we went from 2,400 breweries when I worked the business plan to almost 10,000 breweries in 2020. We're over 10,000 breweries now. And obviously there's going to be some market saturation. And so we decided we were going to try and be prepared for that. When we first started distributing, being one of the first ones to do 16-ounce cans and rotational one-offs, we were dropping 10, sometimes 20 cases at one store. Well, everyone started canning eventually. Not everyone, but a vast majority of breweries wanted to kind of do what we were doing, what some other breweries were doing. And all of a sudden, those drops started getting a little bit smaller. So we decided to refocus. We intentionally decided to refocus from our brewing program back to our pub. So we started doing all this distributing in order to bring customers into our pub because we just weren't able to make ends meet with the business that we had. Well, now we had that. We even had a really robust catering program that we started in 2019. And in 2020, we had a lot of catering jobs already on the books, weddings and stuff all planned for the summer. That brings us to Act 2, the pandemic pivot. And that happened, AKA, oh shit. And there it was, March 23rd. Governor Inslee shuts everything down. Oh shit. And so I'm going to back up a little bit because we all have personal lives as well. And I just want to, we all went through really tough times in our personal lives during the pandemic. Sarah's had some cousins who were 12 and 13, and they're amazing, amazing individuals. There are people that we hardly knew at the time, though. We had only met them maybe 2 or 3 times at family events in the past. But due to certain circumstances, they needed a place to stay. And we were already parents. We had a couple of little tots, and we said we would be willing to do that. And even though we had a very small 2-bedroom 850 square foot house. So we were going to try and rent a house and then rent our house out. And they are actually scheduled to move in with us the same week that the pandemic hit. And so we really didn't have a good solution. The rental house we were going to get fell through. We weren't going to be able to rent out our own house at this point. We actually switched houses with my mom, who had some extra bedrooms. So that was just wild. The most difficult thing that I've ever experienced in my personal life, probably while I'm experiencing the most difficult thing in my professional life, but it also kept us grounded, and they were such beautiful humans, and it was so rewarding that I don't know for sure that we would have made it through the pandemic without having something that was just so important that we had to fight for. So anyways, let's get back to the professional side of the pandemic. How are we going to start making money now? We can't have people inside, right? So we're not going to make money in our pub. It's shut down. Are we going to distribute to bars and restaurants, which is where most of our distribution went? No, because they're also closed. Imagine that. Okay, so what about grocery? We can sell in grocery, right? No, small brew pub that can, they don't have the margins to hit major grocery, and they don't have the capacity to hit major grocery. So we did not have any chain approvals. So essentially that meant we had no way to move our beer. We had a bunch of beer. We had 4 years left on our lease. We had no money coming in, and we had 4 years left on our original startup loans that we still had to pay down. No money coming in. And so as you can imagine, the bill started adding up. I mean, we basically had to kind of pick and choose, what do we have to pay and what can we put off? It hit Washington first, the pandemic did. And so we kind of, I don't know, people thought I was wearing a tinfoil hat, honestly, at the time. But I was getting prepared for a shutdown. It was looking more and more like it was going to happen. So we set up online ordering from day one. We got some picnic tables outside. We got a sink, ran a hose outside for a hand washing station. We put in a porta potty, and we just sold to-go food. People could buy online, and then we would bring the food out, set it on a table, and they could eat it. Also during that time, some people reached out to us about if they could buy some meals for Interfaith Works, which worked with shelters to help unhoused people. And we said, yeah, I mean, we wish we could donate these, but we can't. We don't have any money. And they said, no, we'd love to buy them and help give you guys business. And that worked out pretty good. So we actually threw $5 meals on the menu that we could sell throughout the week. And then every week we would deliver those to Interfaith Works. And after the first few months, that really kind of dried off once people got pandemic fatigue, but we kept on delivering meals every single week. And that was something that also actually kept us grounded. It helped us feel good about what we were doing, even though we could have really used those resources ourselves. You have to feel good about yourself if you're going to keep powering through something like that. So that was really important to us. Just for an example, though, of how the pandemic hit us, in 2019, our revenue was $2.2 million. 2020, our revenue was less than $1 million. So that's huge. That's a huge, and keeping in mind that 3 months of that was a full-on full-service restaurant. So you subtract that, and it's well over $1.2 million difference. So like, how does anybody survive that? Well, we had no idea at the time. We just said we are going to find a way. So how are we gonna get the money to continue on? How are we gonna do that? Well, bank loan. Yeah, we like our bank a lot, but there's no way they were going to give us a loan when we had no money coming in. Yeah, not going to happen. What about investors? Yeah, let's get an investor. Yeah, that's not going to happen either. Let's be real, okay? But there was one thing. Being that the pandemic hit Washington State first, we could get the EIDL loan. That's the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. That's designed, it wasn't designed for COVID necessarily, because this is kind of the first big pandemic we've had, but earthquakes, other natural disasters to help businesses get back on their feet. And so we applied for this the very first day it was available in Washington, and we were approved for $500,000. On top of that, it's a 30-year term at 3.75%, which honestly is way better than any business loan. Granted, we're going to burn through this money really, really quick. I mean, look at that. Really, $2 million was our break-even point that we needed to hit for the full-service restaurant to be able to make money, and we are well below that. So what can we do? Well, we already know how to cook food. We know how to drive. We should buy a van. We bought a van. We know how to mail things, and we've got a lot of beer to send out, so we can ship beer. Let's do that. And we'd have to learn e-commerce. That's something that we weren't really familiar with, but it's something we knew we could learn. But was that going to be enough? We didn't know. No one knew at this time. Was this going to be a 3-month pandemic, a 3-year pandemic? What does this look like? And especially, what will downtown Olympia look like on the other side of the pandemic? This might require an entirely new business model. We've got this huge facility. Our focus is now a pub-first business model, 100%, very inefficient brewery. And we don't have any customers. We don't have any lunch rush. We don't have any happy hour. So we reached out to a friend who knew web design, helped me start up a Shopify store. And we started doing family meal kits. We did 3 per week. People would pre-order them from our website. And not only family meal kits, but we had a bunch of dried goods. And honestly, we had access to things that grocery stores were running out of. We had toilet paper in there because grocery stores were running out of toilet paper. Yeast. People were running out of yeast. And then we wanted to help the other small businesses that also were in the same struggle as us. And so we got as much local produce as we could, and we threw that on the store as well. And then we did these beautiful meal kits. Now, of course, we couldn't compete with Blue Apron or any of those big national meal kit providers, but we did do something pretty special. It was pretty easy to cook for the consumer. It was all homemade. It had really good ingredients. And so this was not something that was necessarily meant to be a moneymaker. Sure, maybe it was going to take off. It wasn't just solely throwing shit at walls so to see what would stick. This was largely to keep moving, to keep relevant. The minute you stop moving, how long does it take you to pivot? How nimble are you from a stop? And we knew we just had to keep going if we were going to figure this out. And then the shipping the beer. Well, I know how to make a website now. I know how to make a Shopify store. We can't send beer out of state, but we can send it within Washington state. And so we started actually going around to other breweries that we liked too. And we would go down to Oregon and we would go up to Seattle and we would pick up beer and we would sell that beer on this website. And again, it would have taken a few $1 million to really make a beer delivery service that was profitable. Right? But it wasn't losing us money. It was paying for itself. We had to keep ourselves busy. We had to keep our employees busy. At this point, we were getting some pre-check protection money in the PPP. And the way that worked was you got it specifically to pay your employees. And so we might as well keep as many people employed as we can and spend that money, even if that little side hustle is just breaking even, because it's still keeping us relevant and it's keeping us moving. But it was more and more looking like we were going to need a pivot, right? What will downtown Olympia look like on the other side of the pandemic? Well, Washington has a lot of office jobs, Boeing, Microsoft, Google, and they all went to work from home. And in downtown Olympia, we rely on state jobs. Right across the street from us is OSPI, the Office of the Superintendent of Public Administration. And then we got the Health Authority just a block from us. And we would get so much lunch business from them and happy hour. And that was just non-existent. Pre-COVID, 6.3% of the workforce in Washington was telecommuting. And then by 2021, that was up to 24.2% of the workforce. And that was really felt in Olympia. In Thurston County alone, 22% of the workforce is employed by the state of Washington. They're all working from home. And honestly, most of them are still working from home. The return to office has not yet happened. So as you can tell, we had a really a big change. So what could this pivot be? We had no idea, but our brewer, he had a vision and he came to us and we weren't looking at this as a pivot at the time. He just asked us in August if he'd be open to him brewing a non-alcoholic beer. And my wife and I had done a sober October and dry January the past couple of years at least. And we said, can you have this done by October? So he had about a month. He had already done a little bit of research, but he had a lot more learning to do. And he wasn't really happy with how most people were doing it. He wanted to do it differently. And so he proposed a non-alcoholic beer and he started brewing it. So my wife and I, of course, we started drinking as much as we could. We were trying everything we could. This is a more modern picture, so some of these things weren't out at the time. But we literally tried everything we could order online. We tried everything we could find in the grocery store. And, we weren't happy with most of it. There was a lot of bad stuff out there. There's also some very good stuff out there for sure. When it finally done brewing it, this was just a one-off beer. We called it Self-Care. That was the name of the beer. And holy crap, we liked it way better than anything we had tried. And it was just absolutely incredible to us. And we did do it different. There's three main ways that people brew non-alcoholic beer. They either brew a regular beer and they remove the alcohol from the normal strength beer. To us, we've never been a fan of those. Many of the important esters that you get from the fermentation process can be removed alongside the alcohol. And it just doesn't really taste like a beer to us. We've had some very good examples for sure, but not so beer-like. Another way people do it is to arrest fermentation, basically brewing a regular beer, cutting off the fermentation process before it gets to that 0.5% alcohol cutoff. And to us, we weren't a big fan of that. It made a swaningly sweet, malty sort of beverage that almost tastes as sweet as a soda. So we didn't want to go that route either. Some people brew very low ABV beers and then they liquor them back. They add water. So they'll brew to like maybe 1% or 2% so that they can get that fermentation process. They are going to get those esters. But as soon as it's watered down, you got a really thin beer. You have virtually zero head retention. There's no mouthfeel whatsoever. So we decided to go the controlled fermentation method in which you use a specialty yeast. The yeast can only ferment certain types of sugar, so you control how many of those sugars you put in it. So you kind of can calculate, kind of what your ABV is going to be. And then that's an incredibly difficult way to do this. You find these off flavors that you've never experienced before, and no one else is doing it. So you can't just call the brewery down the street and say, what the heck is going on here? You got to trial and error the crap out of things. You got to talk to the yeast manufacturers, and there's just so much that goes into it. And we definitely had to dump batches in this process. But in the end, we came out with this product that went through a complete fermentation process, start to finish, creating all of those esters that make beer taste like beer and retaining them because we're not removing the alcohol. We're not removing those esters. And so we were really happy with what we came up with. And beyond just having this really cool fermentation process that we were using, you remember our brewer was a malt sales guy. He was way into malt. And we had been using micro malted grains for a long time, but pretty much since day one. We were contacting the maltsters over in central and eastern Washington and using these just beautiful flavors that they have so much more going for them than your traditional commodity malt. We're also just a hop, skip, and a jump from Yakima Valley, which makes some of the best hops in the world. And they've got scientists constantly developing new hops. I mean, we are in a place for good beer. And we always wanted to be innovating through what is now going to be our pilot system, which is our tiny little brew pub system, doing tons of one-off releases. And we wanted to be the first in market with lots of esoteric styles, right? And we've done that. Like, how many NA breweries have done a dark Czech Pilsner? Probably none that I know of. Maybe there have been some by now, but we're doing all this really cool stuff in addition to, the hazy IPA that people want, the American lager that people want. And so we have this wonderful product, right? And now it's time to go to market. As you recall, we don't really have a market, but we did put some things in place, right? So how are we going to move this? Well, we've got porch drops, right? We threw it on there, and we had people buying this by the case because remember, we dropped it right before Sober October. You can look at the date here, September 17th, we started pre-selling it. So it wasn't even in cans yet, but we had tasted it and we knew it was working, so we started pre-selling it. And we had garden movement. We were driving these beers all around and delivering them to people in our community alongside their meal. And then the last thing is we still did have a distributor in Oregon. We actually had a distributor in Washington too, and that actually wasn't going well. So we used the pandemic as an excuse to get out of that relationship since we knew we weren't going to be sending them a lot of beer anyways. Inebriated in Portland, they specialized in small breweries like us. So they were not moving a lot of beer. They weren't really buying our beer anymore because most of the mom and pop shops were closed. But we had a new product that nobody else in the Pacific Northwest was doing. And he wanted some, and he was able to move quite a bit. So basically we sold out incredibly quickly, probably faster than we've ever sold out any beer. And so we knew something was pretty cool was going on, right? So now self-care is not a one-off release anymore. We're going to do 2 more self-care beers, right? And let's keep this little experiment going. And Dry January is right around the corner. We did a Helles, we did a hazy IPA, right? Okay, so those sold out incredibly quickly too. And we're like, holy shit, we're onto something. Meanwhile, the pandemic raged on. That's our chef at the time. He basically built a bubble for us to work out of. And funny side note, those are IKEA doors for cabinets, which were way cheaper than custom windows. So for $1,000, we had this beautiful glass wall that kept us safe. We had a roll-up door. We were able to let customers in earlier than normal. So we actually had a little opening where we could open and close to take orders while we're wearing our masks, and then we bring the food out. But there was restrictions. We had to have air purifiers. We had to have a CO2 meter to make sure that there was enough airflow, and if the CO2 got too high, we had to close. Tables had to be 15 feet apart. And we also live in a very, very liberal community where people were very conscious about the pandemic. And we just didn't have a lot of people utilizing inside. People wanted to be outside. And that was just the normal that we lived in, right? Meanwhile, we're running out of cash. What's the solution to that? Well, you know what? Let's go ahead and take out another 500K. We're onto something. The interesting thing about this, though, is that there was such uncertainty. 500K might seem like a lot of money to play with, but if you go back to that $1.2 million drop in revenue, how long do you think that's going to keep our operations alive while we're doing these things? So we didn't have the capacity to really push out self-care, nor get those efficiencies of scale. 500,000 would only get us so much equipment anyways. And honestly, at this point, for us to blow all of that money on equipment to hope that we could, get self-care into retail, it didn't make a lot of sense. But it gave us breathing room, it gave us space, it gave us runway. And so it gave us the time to say, what's not working? Our pub first business model is not working. It's no longer sustainable. At the end of 2022, we made the decision to close our kitchen at the beginning of 2023 and bring in food trucks instead. Our revenue went way down, but our losses also went way down because it was pretty clear at that point that the state workers weren't coming back anytime soon. And so continuing to hold out and just bleed money, it just didn't make any more sense. So what is working was the question, right? Well, self-care, obviously. Porch drops never really took off. It kept us relevant. The garden movement never really took off. It kept us relevant. Self-care was in a place where it could take off. And so basically we had to leave behind our pub first business model and move to a production first business model. We found our pandemic pivot. So that's the end, right? We're good? No. It requires a new business model, a production business model. We're not a production brewery. We have zero economies of scale whatsoever, no economies of scale. We don't have the capacity to expand in a significant enough way given our lack of resources and given our lack of pub business. So we've got this people are telling us, from all over the country that we've got this golden ticket. And it's well, that's great, but we can't find that place where we're supposed to cash this in, right? So we had a lot of work to do, but at least we had something to work with. And so that brings us to Act 3, which is the oh yeah part of the story, right? Okay, so this is still the origin story of self-care. This is Act 3. We had a really big little problem, and that was this tiny little brew space that was never meant to be a production brewery. It had really good margins on a $7 pint over the bar that cost us 80 cents worth of beer in the glass. But when you start bringing in mobile canners and pressure sensitive labels, because you can't buy printed cans by the truckload, all the labor that's involved for such small batches, it's not profitable, as I touched on earlier. And beyond that, we can't just put more tanks in here, even if we could afford them. I mean, that $500,000 could have gotten us a $20,000 tank here, a $20,000 tank there, and we could have slowly built. We just frankly didn't have the space. So we had another problem, and that's the piggy bank. Production facilities with efficiencies of scale cost millions. That $500,000 that we're burning through in order to create this brand, that's not going to get us the equipment that we need at all. And so we're still losing money hand over fist. We're gaining brand equity though, right? And that's important. And the question is, are we gaining equity faster than we're losing this money? Obviously that's the goal, because we really didn't see another way out of this. So what about co-packing, contract brewing, right? Full Sail does it down in Oregon. There's this place called Octopi, and you might not think that you've had their beer, but if you drink non-alcoholic beer, you probably have. They brew a lot of non-alcoholic beer for a lot of different non-alcoholic beer companies. They also helped a lot of the big companies release some of their flagships in non-alcoholic formats in order to get them into the market before they could then switch and brew their own non-alcoholic beer. But these companies already had brand recognition. They're already in supermarkets. And so it's really easy to take your Deschutes supermarket beer and then say, hey, now we've got this NA beer because NA is brewing up. How about we put that on the shelf next to it? And a grocery store is going to say, yeah, sure, you guys are doing great. But if you're not already in the grocery store, you can't even talk to these people, right? But we found out that the minimums are so high that there's just no way we were going to be able to do that. And on top of that, you had to pay for this up front. And where were we going to find that money to dump $50,000, $60,000 into a large batch of beer and hope that we could sell it all before it went bad? So that wasn't going to work. Too high minimums. And so this is another chicken and the egg situation. We need to have capacity before we get into major retail, but we need to be in major retail before we can get capacity. That's why these big regional breweries were able to pivot so quickly. And so what about a strategic partner? Same sort of thing. We actually approached 3 different large regional breweries that had excess capacity, and they all really liked what we were doing, but we really had no traction yet. We didn't have a name for ourselves yet. So they tasted the product and they loved it. And they're like, holy shit, how'd you do that? But they weren't sure it was going to work. And really, no one really wanted to get in bed with us until we had that proof of concept, right? So we have a great product, no proof of concept. That wasn't going to work either. So the nutshell is we didn't have enough brand awareness to land a strategic partner, right? We needed either a chicken or an egg. And we didn't care which one we had. We would have taken either, but no one was going to give us either of those things. Our current brand equity is way off beyond that lowest one. We had essentially no brand equity besides a few people in the Pacific Northwest who had tried our beer and liked it. And we needed a lot more brand equity if we were going to find that strategic partner. We needed to be way up there towards the top. So how are we going to build the equity that we need? So this was our current, at the time, area of opportunity, and our literal area of opportunity was Washington State, right? So obviously we had the tap room, but craft NA beer is a little bit too niche for low populated areas, right? There's a reason you don't see a non-alcoholic brewery in every small town, because there's just not enough people who drink non-alcoholic beer to support that, right? So we couldn't just build this brand through our tap room. Even if we had customers, it wouldn't have mattered. Even if we had our 2019 revenue, it didn't matter. We would not have been able to build this brand in our tap room. So we need a larger customer pool. Washington State, 7.5 million, that's a little bit more, but still at this point, we're racking up a lot of debts. We're pretty sure that at this point that we're going to be screwed on the other side of the pandemic and that our pub first business model was not going to work. We thought we needed a bigger pool than that even. How big? I mean, we already knew how to build a website. We understood e-commerce. We knew how to ship beers in Washington. How is that any different from shipping it across the United States, right? And so we built a website. And the point here was to make some noise. We needed people to notice us. We're in this little corner of the country. People on the East Coast didn't know who we were. But we needed to capture the early adopter demographic, because let's remember, we got in this really, really early, before a lot of the consumers were drinking it. We needed to get in the hands of beer writers. We knew we had one of the best products in the country because we tasted it all. But other people didn't know that, and other people aren't going to take our word for it, because everybody thinks their beer is the best beer in the country. It's just the way it works. But almost more importantly is we're always trying to look ahead. We're always trying to, plant seeds in everything that we do. Even going back to their very first year one, we're always planting seeds. And some of those seeds, some of them we let kind of fizzle and die out, and then some of them we nourish and they grew into new and awesome things, kind of like our catering program. That was one thing. We planted a little seed. We did a couple jobs. It turned into something big. And so we knew this was going to plant seeds for future opportunity. And we already had all the building blocks. We collected all these tools. We created these tools that we needed in order to build a foundation. We just didn't have the foundation yet, right? So we started building. We started building a foundation. And if you go back to, kind of our 3 magnets days, you'll see that it was 4 years till we turned a profit. And there were some things we could have done in the short term, changing our business plan, dumbing down our menu, because we really wanted to do like really cool stuff and we knew it was was going to take a while for people to kind of learn to appreciate and understand what we're doing, because it was not something that people were used to in our town necessarily. We believe definitely in going for the long haul over the short-term kind of glory, the short-term profits. And so we knew we needed a really strong foundation because we had some very lofty goals all of a sudden for this brand. We're like, this is a world-class brand, and we need to get it out into the world, and we're going to need a strong foundation. And there's been a lot of breweries that have popped up and they create their beer and then they just go straight into retail. And if you go on a lot of the NA beer forums on Facebook and Reddit and whatnot, you'll see kind of some of the same national brands come up over and over again where people aren't really happy with them. So we built a website and we started shipping the beer. We did some really cool stuff. We created a Care Club, which is kind of like our Amazon Prime. It's like a loyalty program. People could earn Care coins in their piggy bank for discounts. They can get free beer and whatnot. And we did this other really cool thing because we wanted to get in the hands of retailers as well and bypass the distributor. Because it's another cool thing about non-alcoholic beer is that a lot of the laws that apply, in fact, most of the laws that apply to leaded beer do not apply to non-alcoholic beer, right? We didn't have to worry about the 3-tier system. There are things we do have to worry about, but that wasn't one of them. And in the state of Washington, you can't pick and choose who you sell your beer to. If someone says they want your beer, you have to sell them your beer. But we didn't want to. We had people all the time like, oh, you should get into here, you should get into there. And it's like, no, we can't. We don't have the capacity. Plus, we're losing money on every case. So we need to make sure that every single case that we send out is paying itself back in equity, at least paying back those losses in equity, right? And so we were pursuing quality placements over quantity of placements because, again, it's the only thing that made sense. And so, here's an example of a form we just got the other day. Somebody put it in for Phoenix, Arizona. We take pride in carrying premium, high-quality craft non-alcoholic beer, and I've heard nothing but great things about self-care. And this is not a normal thing for us to hear. I don't know if you've heard of Roberta's Pizza, Michelin star restaurant that started in Bushwick, where ironically my dad lived for much of his childhood. And they've got, I think, 3 or 4 restaurants now in New York, a couple in the LA area. And Chef Carlo really liked our beer and was apparently ordering from our website, but I wasn't really familiar with him at the time. And he had emailed to ask if we would sell to his restaurant, and of course we will, And so these are the kinds of accounts that like we really, really are going after because, it's going to bring that equity up and it's going to make us more likely to succeed in the end. And it's not just pissing away, losses on each case for no reason, just for the sake of selling beer. It's with a purpose. And so going into this, Athletic already has market saturation. They were the first. They blasted that door wide open. They're way better than anything on the market at the time. And they're still a very, very solid, beer. They make very good beer. They already had pretty much market saturation, including chains in C-stores, by the time we really started getting out into the world, right? And so how do we compete with this? The answer is we don't. Not yet. We don't compete with this. What we're going to do is we're going to let Athletic continue to spend money, lots and lots of money, kicking down doors. And then we're going to go after their lowest hanging fruits, right? But how are we going to do that? Well, one thing we're going to do is we know that Gen Z and millennials are really leading the way when it comes to this. They're a lot more health focused, whereas in our youth, it was cool to go out and get blitzed when we were in high school. It's not to them. It's actually kind of embarrassing. I mean, obviously not all of them, but to many of them it is. And to us, Athletic just didn't really seem to have that kind of youthful appeal, right? And I'm not saying that I fully understand Gen Z and millennials. I absolutely do not fully understand. I'm 48 right now, but I've been working side by side with youth for the last 20 years. I work in our pub 6-7 days a week. And I work with 20 somethings and 30 somethings. And I know how to communicate with Gen Z. I know how to communicate with millennials. It's a normal part of my job, working with customers on a near daily basis, in addition to everything I do behind the scenes to make self-care work. And so I'm not a hedge fund guy, for example, who saw a market opportunity and filled that. And that was brilliant too. I'm not giving shade. I'm just talking about how we're different, right? We're kind of built beer first mentality as opposed to a business first mentality. So rather than coming up with a business idea and figuring out how to make that beer, we came up with the beer and then we figured out how to make it a business. And then the other thing was to appeal to creative types. We had already done all these beers that were music themed. We had done a beer with Chris Novoselic from Nirvana at one point during the pandemic. This was after we had already put out our first few self-cares, but we did a beer with Mudhoney and Sub Pop. We had some really cool things going on, and really we've been surrounded by creatives our entire lives, right? And that was one of the reasons that we're passionate about what we're doing, is because creative people, especially working musicians, they don't really usually make a lot of money. They don't usually have healthcare. They're just doing it for the passion. And we see a lot of self-medicating by creatives. And we're proud to be able to provide a tool just to help people have healthier relationships with alcohol, whether that means one less beer over the course of your life, or whether that means, completely swearing off alcohol. We're not here to judge. We're not here to wag fingers. I personally also drink regular alcohol. What we're here to do is say, here's a tool if you'd like to use it. And if you don't, that's fine too. And so how did we do this? We saw that like Coachella was doing a kind of booze-free bars and stuff like that, right? And in late 2021, still during kind of the shutdowns, we met Michael Hurley. He's a Greenwich Village folk icon. Met him on our patio by a mutual friend who brought him in, and his friend was trying to get him to play a show in Olympia. He actually lives up in Oregon towards Astoria, and he said, "I've always liked that one brewery you take me to. I'd like to play a show there." Like, well, let's make this happen. Like, this guy's a legend. So we threw him up on the grassy knoll, and we threw out like a Facebook post. I think we set up a Facebook event like less than a week prior, and we didn't anticipate that many people were going to show up. But holy shit, they turned out. And we were like, this is such a great experience. So we had to make it a series, and so we called it Sherler Sundays. In the next summer, we brought in one of my favorite musicians in the world. Agreed to do it. Doug Marsh from the band Built to Spill. That was just like. This is one of the most amazing things for me in my lifetime. We had Lori Goldston there on cello. She came and did a performance one year. You might not recognize her, but she did the cello on Nirvana's Unplugged, even though she's way more accomplished than that. But this is what she's most known for. And we actually released a record in some 7-inchers from the first couple of years that we did this. And so we did it in 22. We brought it back in 23. We brought it back in 24. And we were spending our pandemic relief money to make this happen as well, because let me tell you, free shows, they don't really make a lot of money. But again, we're talking about building foundations, laying groundwork. And guess what happens in 2025, this year? Me and my friend Markley, who started this with me, we funded a nonprofit, Free Music Olympia, and we were able to apply for grants. We got local sponsorships. And this year, it was paid for through grants and sponsorships. And we had freaking Swamp Dogg. If you're not familiar with him, look up the movie Swamp Dogg Gets His Pool Painted. It's a documentary that just came out a few months back. It's been hitting the art house theaters. And he's a legend. He played here a day after his 83rd birthday. It was an absolutely magical experience. So again, not cutting corners, not getting too hyped up to, hit the market early. These are all things that were core beliefs of us. Just wait until it feels right and don't make those moves if it doesn't feel right. And so looking at athletics primary demographic, obviously athletic types, right? I remember getting ads on my Facebook feed for athletic, where you'd have just a close up of somebody holding a can of athletic beer with like knuck tats, right? Tattoos on their knuckles, and thinking like, wow, that's so off brand. Like they're really trying to, but I get it, because their branding is very, very, straight and narrow. Obviously, that's working for them. Again, brilliant branding, but complete opposite of what we are. The opposite end of the spectrum from athletes to me is artistic types, creatives, and then you got intellectuals, or all kind of overlap as well. And so we knew, I'm talking about the lowest hanging fruit. That's the lowest hanging fruit, right? It's there. And we don't even need to create this persona. That's just who we are. It's natural to us. We didn't have to do market research on how to appeal to creative folks, right? And so we know that on a larger scale, as we move out, there's room for us. So there's definitely room for us. We see a lot of non-alcoholic breweries and breweries kind of doing this whole like badass thing, like Brewdog, with their punk AF beer. And it's really ironic because they're kind of the antithesis of punk. They're not a very punk company. But we're kind of over this whole badassery. We want to do things that we think are cool. And then we hope that other people find it cool too, because that's the only way to do it. Otherwise, it's not authentic. If you're having a marketing firm tell you what people think are cool, then how are you any different from every other product on the market who hires a marketing firm, right? So 4 years now of shipping beer across the country, how did we do? Did we make noise? Did we capture the early adopter demographic? Did we get into the hand of beer writers? Did we plant seeds for future growth? Well, yeah, did we make noise? Let's start there. Boy, did we. We were introduced to the food and beverage director at Bumbershoot in early 2023 by somebody who thought we would be a good fit. And we talked to them, and we ended up brewing a beer for Bumbershoot that year, which was really freaking cool. Bumbershoot, if you're not familiar, it's kind of like, South by Southwest or Coachella, if you will, but it's Seattle, and it's much older than all of those. It dates back over 50 years, and it's just a really incredible arts and music festival. And then we did it again last year. It was really cool. They had us back. It was in all the beer stations. And then this year we did it again. We still have this beer on our website if you're interested in it. It's quite delightful. Pacific Northwest IPA. And the really cool thing was that last year, we're talking about making noise. We're talking about brand equity, right? We knew that they were going to make a video. We thought it was for social media. And then we got some complimentary tickets because we donated some of that beer to them. And we went, and actually one of my favorite bands, Pavement, was playing. And we found out on 2 of the 3 main stages, they were showing that advertisement between every single band. It was like a minute advertisement. It was between every single band on repeat, like about every 10 minutes in front of tens and tens of thousands of people, right? And this is the kind of exposure, like we were sandwiched between Ballmer Foundation, Steve Ballmer from Microsoft, his foundation, that was a big sponsor. Amazon was a huge sponsor, and our ads showing between these like huge sponsorships. And so when you're talking about brand equity, like that's brand equity right there. And so that was the first major sigh of relief. Like, this hope that we're building equity faster than we're running out of runway, right? And this was a huge sign that we absolutely were. This was incredibly exciting for us. We also got to do some other really cool things. We worked with this organization called Smash Seattle. They provide healthcare and health resources for working musicians in the Pacific Northwest. And we got to do a beer with Ben Gibbard from Death Cab for Cutie and the Postal Service called Echoes from Someone I Used to Know. That's one of the quotes, one of the lyrics from a Postal Service song. And then another year we featured 4 different musicians, including Corin Tucker from Sleater-Kinney, who we just adore. We love that band. And then just to kind of show kind of full circle, like, I know that we're working with some of these musicians that are kind of from my time frame, but like, you look at this other picture to the right, that's the Linda Lindas. Like, they're huge. They just opened Smashing Pumpkins and Green Day, and they were like the young punk band. And they're incredible musicians. They're all very, very young. And they showed up to one of our Sugar Sundays that one of their friends were playing at. So that helped us solidify, we are multi-generational. We're not just a bunch of old farts stuck in our ways, right? And then Sip Magazine, that is the beverage magazine in the Pacific Northwest. And every year they have their Best of Craft Beer Awards. And for 3 years straight, we've taken platinum, beating out major players in the Pacific Northwest. And we were able to take platinum 3 years straight, which is really just awesome. It really helps solidify us as the go-to non-alcoholic brewery in the Pacific Northwest. And beyond that, we were the first dedicated brewery. There were other breweries that had done one here and there. I don't know if anyone ever packaged one. I think people just had them on tap. But we were the first to actually create a non-alcoholic beer brand. And we're definitely the most robust. We've had almost 80 unique recipes to date. So talk about experience, this like proprietary process that really nobody else can figure out how to do. And we're not just doing it, but we're doing it 80-fold, right? And so did we get self-care into the hands of beer writers? Well, yeah, we certainly did. Our very first one was in February of 2022. So we had less than a year of shipping beer from our website. And the Chicago Tribune, their beer writer, Josh Knoll, drank a whole bunch of NAIPAs for Dry January. And he wrote about it the next month. And he said us and Untitled Art were his 2 favorite for Dry January. And that's awesome because we're huge Untitled Art fans. We honestly think they were doing some of the best beer in the country, non-alcoholic beer, not to mention their leaded beer. And fun fact, Untitled Art was Octopi. They started Octopi as basically a production brewery to do contract brewing, and they rolled this brand out of that, and they've since been bought by Asahi of all places. And then the Oregonian in 2022 did a taste test of 25 beers, recommendations they got from beer tenders around Portland. We got first place. Punch Drink said we were one of their favorites as well. And then the really huge one, we had quite a few that I'm not mentioning, but the huge one came last year, 2024. Jordan Mickelman. He's a James Beard Award-winning beverage writer. And he wrote an article for Taste, which is a James Beard Award-winning food and beverage magazine. And this article was all about micro beers, macro beers too, like Bud Zero, Heineken, imported beers, like all that boutique stuff from Europe that makes their way over here. You find a lot of that stuff at Total Wine. And he declared that we were the best all-around brewery because he really liked what we were doing. We weren't just doing 3 beers and saying these are non-alcoholic beers. We were really mixing shit up and using quality ingredients and using, innovative techniques. And that was so cool. And then this year, in 2025, VinePair called us one of 20 breweries to watch in 2025, and we were the only non-alcoholic brewery on the list. So now all of a sudden, we've got buzz, but guess what? We're still kind of at that place. We don't have any capacity, and we can't make money off of our beers yet, right? So we're going to keep building equity, right? That's the goal. And we were approached at the end of 2024 by Levy Restaurants, who manages the food program at Lumen Field, and they said they wanted our beer. And if you know anything about stadiums, that's not how this generally works. Some stadiums are pay to play, but certainly they're not coming after you, especially as a small independent brewer. That's just completely unheard of. And so we were stocked for the very first Sounders match in February, and they brought in both of our proposed flagships, the Sure Easiest and our Freak Flag, and now we've been available for the Seahawks games. We're actually been invited this Sunday, if you happen to be in the suites, if you can afford that. I know I can't, but we're doing a tasting event in the suites at Lumen Field this Sunday. It is at 1:00. Theoretically, but that might get moved because of Mariners playoffs. So we're going to keep you posted on that as well on our Start Engine updates if you'd like to see when we're going to be there. Anyways, huge opportunity. there's 60,000+ capacity at Lumen Field. To be in front of that many people is just absolutely insane for a small producer. So talk about kicking the doors wide open. And it did. And I told you about a special kind of announcement that we're going to have later on today. And so I will share that with you. So did we capture the early adopter demographic? Well, we did. There's a lot of influencers for non-alcoholic Non-Alc Beer on Instagram, on Reddit and whatnot, mostly Instagram, probably TikTok too. I don't personally do the TikToks, but maybe someday we'll have a marketing manager who knows how to do that kind of stuff. Someone from Gen Z probably. But I really, really like this one. It doesn't even have that many followers, but if you read their reviews, you can tell this person really knows a lot about beer. They talk about things that your average person posting about their beer don't even touch on. And I say 8 of 12 in this, but as of last night, it's actually 9 of 13 beers were rated world class by this reviewer, Hang Sober, on Instagram. 3 were rated excellent and 1 was rated very good. And this is not one of those review influencers that is telling everybody that everything's good. They've got a lot of really bad reviews too. And it's really cool that we don't have any bad reviews. And it just kind of goes to show, like, this person is many states away. They got followers in different states. It shows, again, what we're doing by planting these seeds all across the country, right? That's really huge. We have 4 years now of planting seeds across the country to plan for future growth. And that's absolutely huge. Obviously, we still need to get past this first hump and get into major retail. But once we do that, once we prove successful in major retail in the Pacific Northwest, we can then nourish these seedlings via targeted social media marketing to prime new markets for a major retail rollout. So we've already been in California. We used to distribute our beer down there. That might be the next step after, we get into major retail in Washington and Oregon. And something else that's really important to note about this is, like, when we started doing this, there were not a lot of direct-to-consumer non-alcoholic breweries. There was a small handful. Now there's a ton. And this is not the kind of experience that any new startup can recreate retroactively. It's too hard to gain footing right now in the DTC market because there's so many other brands out there. And so by getting in so early and getting these seeds planted so early and continuing to kind of water them slowly and fertilize them until our big moment comes, that's huge for the potential growth of this brand. So the nutshell is that we did not have enough brand awareness to land a strategic partner. Our previous brand equity was way down there, but we got it to where it needed to be. We built a chicken. That was pretty cool. And it's time to lay some eggs, right? We'll even teach the chicken to fly. So we built a metric poo ton of brand equity, and now it's time to leverage this equity, right? So how are we going to do that? First, we need to find a strategic partner. So Talking Cedar, right? We had already approached them a couple years prior. At the time, we didn't have as much presence. We hadn't done as much bullshit. We certainly weren't in Lumen Field yet. It was a different leadership team for the brewing team at the time, and we kind of got the feeling there wasn't a lot of interest, but we were told that their canning line was a little bit too slow. They couldn't keep up with all the other contracts they had at the time. So we kind of shelved that for a little bit. Almost a year ago now, we readdressed it, and they had seen some of the things that we did, and they were really thrilled that we were in Lumen Field. And this time they were really excited to work with us. They also had a much better canning line at this point, so that also made it more feasible. But here's what's really cool about these guys. There's a few cool things. One is that in 2018, they led the charge to make it so that tribes could have distilleries. They could actually distill alcohol on tribal lands. Before that, they couldn't do it. They got that law changed federally. This is an organization that thinks outside of the box, right? And so that's a perfect fit for us. Beyond that, it's a really special relationship because they are only 20 minutes away from us. So we're talking about Octopi, right? Where people are brewing beer many, many states away, right? Some of these new startups, like I said, they don't even know how to brew beer. They're paying someone to come up with brands, someone to come up with a beer, and then they're rolling that out, right? This is not what we're going to have to experience. This is basically, they're going to be like an extension of our own brewing program. And in fact, we even know some of these brewers. The one right here from their webpage, from the screenshot that I'm posting, we brewed with him when he worked at Fishtail a block away, like a decade ago. We knew these people. They were our friends, and we really like these people. They're so close we can be there for every important milestone. And that's absolutely huge. So we don't have to spend the money on a big facility. Why would we do that? The craft beer bubble has burst. There are closures left and right. There's a lot of capacity out there. Why spend tens of millions of dollars on a facility when we can have somebody else brew that for us and still be there to ensure that it meets our quality standards, right? And it means we have economies of scale. And this is kind of the pricing here of what it costs for us to make some of these beers on our small little brew pub system with zero efficiencies of scale compared to them just doing a 72 barrel batch. And they actually have much more capacity than that. And so let's go ahead and zoom in and look at that bottom line, because we have so many fixed costs that do not even apply to the brewing of the beer because we had a supposed pub first business model. We were losing $10 per case to build this brand on Schiller Easy. We were losing $16 plus per case on Freak Flag to build this brand. So you can see how important those EIDL loans were now. And one of the reasons we wanted to do this webinar is to kind of show this story because, a lot of people look at our numbers from the last couple of years that are on the Start Engine, the website, and like, oh, well, you lost money. Why would I invest in you? It's like, well, did we lose money or did we invest money, right? I know we built more equity than we lost. And so, to me, that's investing money. That's not losing money. Again, that equity is not liquid though, is it? And so you can see now by brewing with Talking Cedar. The other cool thing is, I talked about how we couldn't afford to just spend $60,000 on ordering a truckload of cans from a contract brewer, right? Well, they brew under a licensing deal, which is really, really cool. I almost thought about proposing that to them, thinking there's no way they would go along with that. But actually, that's how they do business, which is really cool. So they do pay for everything up front. And then they sell to our distributors. We still manage the brand, but it's their beer. It actually says it's a Talking Cedar beer brewed by Talking Cedar for self-care. So it is technically their beer, but it's our brand. And then they collect the money from the distributors, and then they cut us a check for half. And we've only really tickled that so far. So far, it's pretty much been the beers that we've sent up to Lumen Fields. But now that we've kind of worked through, there's always growing pains. Scaling up recipes is nowhere close to as simple as doing some simple math. You have to take tank dynamics into account, how much pressure is being applied to that yeast. All of these things make big differences on your finished product. And so you do need to work out some of these kinks, right? But now, we've really learned a lot from this, and we're ready to, keep moving forward. And based upon these numbers, in order to get past our initial losses due to all of our fixed costs, is we really need to hit about 200 stores moving about 3 to 5 cases per week, which is kind of the industry standard for what you're expected. We generally do better than what's anticipated when we go into a new market, but of course there's no guarantees. And so we need to hit about 2 SKUs, 3 to 5 cases per week, and about 200 stores. And that's very much within the realm of possibility once this whole ball starts moving. And then this also allowed us to work with Start Engine. We had actually had a conversation with Start Engine a couple of years ago, and they kind of take a look at what we had and they said, we're not a real good fit. And then it's like, I get that, on paper, we lost money. It doesn't look like investment on paper. It just looks like we lost money on paper. And so who's going to want to invest in us? But then once we started doing all this cool shit and we had things to point to and we had the Bumbershoot things to point to, my friends at Copperwork Distilling up in Seattle had done a couple of successful campaigns, and they recommended I reach back out, and I did. And I said, I don't know if this is a good fit on paper. We have all these losses because, we're pivoting. We're trying to flip this switch, from a pub first business model to a production business model. And we need this money to complete that transition, to finish flipping that switch. And they said, yeah, no, this is the perfect match. And they actually said they had a meeting with their investment board the next day, and they wanted to get the opportunity in front of them. And then the day after that, we heard it was a go. And all of a sudden, we have this way to really get to that next phase. Are we going to need to seek more investment after? This is a good chance that we will. I mean, if we're going to enter different markets and whatnot. But right now, our goal is to get into major retail in Washington and Oregon, because that's where we have the most brand equity and the most experience. And so this is one way that we're going to get to do that. And so, just to also kind of put things in perspective, if you look at our original startup costs when we opened the brewery in 2014, it was $1 million total to open up. That's with an unproven brand and with me and my wife who had no idea how to brew beer. And now where are we at? We do have some personal debt, which we're in no hurry to get paid back on whatsoever, but we only have $1 million in EID debt, and that's on a 30-year loan at 3.75%. And we now have a proven brand, and we have a lot of doors currently opening up for us. And that's huge because we had no doors opening up for us when we first opened. So the other really funny thing about this is that there were so many growing pains entering a new industry. We very quickly became beer first once we started producing over the restaurant, right? That took priority for a long time. And I had a lot to learn. And I made so many big mistakes, of course. And every single mistake was a huge learning experience. And I used to say like, oh man, if I could only do this all over again, I'd kill it the next time. Well, that's what life served us is we're doing this all over again. We are creating a new beer brand from scratch with almost no resources. And look how much further we've already kind of, we're known across the country. We did some really cool things across the country, but we didn't have anywhere close to the brand awareness. The potential for what we have now is just absolutely insane. So we're really excited about that. So that's the end of Act 3. That's the end of Part 1. And we're just kind of starting Part 2 right now. We haven't got very far in it, but we did talk about an announcement that we have to make. And so one really cool thing at the Washington Brewers Fest a couple months ago, a buyer from Costco tried our beer and really liked it and talked to our sales rep and gave him a card. And so I called them up and they said they'd be interested in learning more about our brand. And so we sent them some samples and they tried it and they really, really liked it. He said he's become a huge fan. He even said that his boss thinks we're one of the best non-alcoholic breweries in the country, which is absolutely exciting. And they'd like to do some road shows with us. And if you're not familiar with road shows, you probably, if you've been to Costco, have seen people setting up and selling stuff like on the floor. And they usually do this for one of two reasons. Either it's a product they already carry and they want to build more awareness and boost more sales, or it's a new product that they're thinking of bringing in and they need to see how it's doing. And so that's the category that we would fall into. Now, they're still working on all the details because they would need to be buying this straight from Talking Cedar. We've got a couple other logistics that we're still working on, but we're hoping to do these road shows in the next couple of months. And there's still no guarantee that this will go through because a lot of things can happen between now and then. Obviously, our economy is in a really freaking weird place place right now. Even if it doesn't work out, it's another thing that's showing us that we're going down the right path and we're doing cool shit. We're really confident that it will. There's, of course, no way of knowing. But if it does work out, these roadshows go well, there's a possibility that we're in a handful of Costco stores in the Pacific Northwest. And the really, really cool thing about this is that we're non-alcoholic beer. We don't have to do the 3-tier system. We're allowed to sell beer at different prices, which you can't do with leaded beer in Washington. You can't sell the one retailer at one price and one at the other price. And so we're allowed to lower our prices, and we don't have to go through a distributor. And Costco also takes notoriously slim margins because they rely on bulk sales. And so we're actually probably going to be able to sell this for $9.99 a 4-pack, which is cheaper than what you would pay for a macro beer at a normal grocery store. That's just an insane price point. And, you know, when they first said they wanted us to hit that mark, we were like, that's not even going to be possible, because we're still stuck in this whole, you know, small brew pub kind of train of thought. And we start like thinking about it, and we're looking at the margins, and it just fit right in with the margins that we're going to have at Talking Cedar. And so we're really, really excited about this. At that price point, we think we're going to move a lot of beer. Again, no way of knowing for sure, but we're going to let people know if these do come to fruition. These road shows will definitely be there, letting folks know, you know, when they're going to be, so y'all can come out and support us and also get a really good deal on our beer. You know, it's really exciting. And so really, that's pretty much it. This is the beginning, part 2. This is the beginning of the sequel to the origin story. And we're thrilled for people to be a part of it who want to help us get to where we need to be. That's pretty much it. Well, actually, I did want to touch on one or two just little things. I just wanted to say, too, that we built this entire brand also with just about 3 FTEs, full-time equivalents, right? And we have about a dozen employees, but only a small fraction of us are actually focused on this. And like I said, we did do everything in-house, our graphic design, our social media, our website. We're rolling with the big kids right now. You know, we're given, you know, when it comes to quality of products, we're giving, you know, all the big players a huge run for their money. And to think we could do that with basically no expendable cash, we weren't able to throw money at problems because we knew we had to keep that money in reserve to keep our runway from getting too short. And so we had to fix all of our problems the old-fashioned way, the slow way, but the very intentional way. And can you imagine, you know, what we can do with this brand once we acquire more resources? You know, when we actually have an executive team, when we have a chief financial officer, you know, we've got all the pieces that we need for successful brands, and those other pieces can be acquired with resources. And so that's where we're at. The Start Engine is just kind of the beginning. It's meant to kind of kickstart us into retail. And from there, you know, we'll see where we go.